Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, Dead by Daylight's most popular killer design, dash killers. Why everyone, including the developers, seems to love them, and the difficult relationship that I've had with them over the years. It's no secret right now, Dead by Daylight loves dash killers. The community certainly can't seem to get enough of them. Dash killers are consistently some of the most played killers in the game, and when a new dash killer comes out, you literally can't get a game of Survivor without that new killer in it. Who else remembers when Wesker came out and DBD became Wesker Simulator for like 4 months, to the point that people started hating going against him because he was so popular? Wesker is coming to 2v8 very soon. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see that happen again. This phenomenon doesn't really happen so much with non-dash killers. Even Unknown, one of the most loved original characters in years, never reached the levels of popularity that the new dash killers have had on launch. And behaviour seems to be willing to afford these killers a level of power they're hesitant to give to other killer archetypes. Dash killers tend to occupy the higher end of tier lists, and when they nerf them, they tend to at least try to compensate them meaningfully where they can help it. Look at Chucky, for example. Chucky has had at least 4 updates in 2024, targeted mostly at winding his power down, but none of these nerfs were particularly backbreaking on their own, and many of them came with compensation buffs to ensure the killer wasn't suffering too hard. This has meant that Chucky has received a gradual reduction in power over the year that he's been out, but even now he's still low A tier in my opinion, because behaviour are okay with giving him a relatively high level of power. And it wouldn't surprise me if he got changed again and got his cooldown buff before too long. The love this game's community and developers alike have for dash killers is even reflected in the recent release schedules that we've been getting. Since the release of Chucky, 4 of DBD's last 5 killers have had some sort of dash. The only one that hasn't had one is Unknown. And even if we exclude Vecna, since his dash it doesn't really provide the same gameplay lethality function as the others, that's still a lot of killers that broadly occupy the same niche. So my question for today is, what the hell's up with that? At least among some members of this community, I've developed a reputation as a bit of a contrarian. At least on the surface level, I understand why. Look at my history of DBD takes. I've consistently advocated for some of the DBD community's most underappreciated killers like Skull Merchant, Houndmaster and Twins, and I've championed DBD's original storytelling and lore in a game where licenses and crossovers are one of the game's biggest selling points. If you heard of my opinions without knowing anything else about me, you'd think I was just a mindless contrarian disagreeing with the popular stuff just for the sakes of it, and my feelings about DBD's proliferation of dash killers doesn't help that perception. To put it simply, I don't care for most of DBD's dash killers. I never have, and that's become increasingly frustrating as behaviour keeps making them and the community keeps glazing them. DBD is doing well. The game's balance is broadly solid, and yet I've never been more cynical about future releases, and whether or not I'm going to actually enjoy them. So I thought now would be a good time to put DBD's most popular killer archetype under the microscope, and try to understand why they are so popular, and why most of them don't click with me, as well as taking a proper look at the few that do. Before we get into it though, it might be a good idea to get a proper definition down as to what a dash killer is and what they can do. I did this with trap killers before, but this will be easier. Fortunately, a dash is pretty self-explanatory most of the time. A dash is a movement ability that causes the killer to move quickly across the terrain in a fixed or semi-fixed direction, and a dash killer is one that features a dash as a big portion of their power budget. This definition is pretty loose and I'll call back to it later, but there are a couple of notable exclusions. Nurse, Bubba and Twins. Nurse sends herself directionally like a dash killer, but she doesn't travel along the terrain, but rather through it. This gives her a fundamentally different identity than the dash killers and should really be treated as her own thing. Twins are similarly strange, because while Victor's pounce does function similarly to a dash, it's kind of an afterthought with regard to Victor's actual lethality. What makes Victor so powerful in chase isn't the fact that he has a dash, it's the fact that he moves at 150% speed towards you before he does it. Most of the time that Victor hits you, he's using his insane movement speed to run up behind you and back rev you to death, without the dash ever coming into it. It's functionally a basic attack that you have to aim a little bit more. Pounces, movement and range are a small part of Victor's power budget, so I wouldn't consider Twins a dash killer by that metric. Bubba is a similar case. His enhanced movement isn't directional and his power budget is in his pallet break and instant down, not really in his movement itself. This means our list of dash killers is as follows: Hillbilly, Demogorgon, Oni, Blight, Wesker, Chucky, Dracula and Houndmaster, with Pig and Vecna as grey areas regarding how you treat their power budget. I would break these killers down further into 2 categories: chase dashes and control dashes. Most killer dashes, like Chucky, Demogorgon and Houndmaster, only really get used in chase, as a way to reach survivors across a tile or catch up to them before they can get to a tile. These are what I would call chase dashes. But some dashes, like those used by Billy, Blight and Oni, are long-ranged enough that they become control dashes. Something that you might use outside of a chase entirely to get where you need to go just as a matter of convenience and time efficiency. They are used for map control, so I'm calling them control dashes. This division doesn't mean a lot for now, but I'll be talking about it later, so keep those in mind. When it comes to the massive popularity of dash killers, I think there are 3 driving factors that draw people to the archetype. The general game feel that going fast and doing the thing quickly just fundamentally feels good, the instant gratification and focus on direct chase over macroplay and game sense, and the mechanical learning curve associated with picking these killers up. The first one is absolutely the most obvious. Killer players hate holding W. It's a powerful tool a lot of survivors will use to buy time against many killers, and one of the most common complaints a lot of killer players have is survivors not even trying to loop the tile and instead just running away in a straight line to waste the killer's time. Dash killers can either cut down the time significantly or straight up remove it. If survivors can't leave a tile without the killer catching up to them, it forces survivors to commit to the tiles they're chasing it, and actually, play the tiles themselves. It encourages chase interaction between the killer and survivor, which leads on to the second reason that dash killers are so popular. The power design gives the killer player the power to take otherwise difficult chases and end them quickly without any setup or particular forethought. A lot of DBD players don't want to engage with the macroplay or game sense elements of the game. They just want to see survivor, chase survivor, down survivor, repeat. And highly lethality killers like dash killers are perfect for this. They don't need to set up anything like a trap killer, they don't need to approach from a certain angle to ambush survivors like a stealth killer, and killers with control dashes can run around the map after getting a hook until they find the next survivor that they want to chase, so they can get into the next one as soon as possible. Dash killers are popular for the same reason barbecue and chili is. Barbecue gives you the tools you need to get into your next chase without having to think about it too much, so you can focus on your chase performance, and that's why so many killer players run it. Dash killers fill a similar role. They get you into chases faster and out of them faster. They reward you for taking chase as much as you can, and if that's what players want to do, then those are killers that you'll often gravitate towards. If you're streaming the game and your attention is split away from the game by your Twitch chat, you're playing with music on, or you're in Discord with your mates, or just playing for chases, you don't want to have to pay attention to anything other than the survivors in front of you, and dash killers give you the tools to do this while still expressing your skill mechanically. These conditions apply to a lot of players, so it isn't surprising that they're so commonly played, especially among streamers or very enfranchised players. And this ties into the third reason that dash killers are so beloved. They have a distinct mechanical learning curve that tangibly rewards you the better you get at the killer. In your first couple of games as a dash killer, you'll miss more than you're happy with, but as you play more, you'll find your muscle memory starting to pick these things up, and you'll get more impressive results with a little practice and proper learning. They feel rewarding to get better at, so people are more inclined to do so. This mechanical skill curve has a bonus perk for dash killer players. For the most part, dash killers have a good reputation for being harder or fairer than the average killer, and thus are considered a respectable main to have. Most of this video is talking about killers from the point of view of playing a killer. I am predominantly a killer player, and when I'm playing Survivor there aren't too many killers I despise going against, but I can't deny it definitely helps to main a killer people like playing against. It means the interactions you have with the community and other players will be better and less toxic. It means fewer players will just give up on hook or disconnect against you for no reason, at least in theory, and because these killers tend to be better understood by the Survivor player base, you're also more likely to get interesting chases where the Survivor plays around your power properly and you feel like your skill is legitimately being tested. Part of this comes from how direct dash killers tend to be. If the little plastic doll or flower-mouthed puppy dog are hurtling themselves towards you at 1,000,000 miles an hour, it's pretty obvious that if they hit the attack, you'll get damaged, and if they miss or you dodge it, they won't hit you. The directness also helps players in picking them up for the first time too. You don't need to track your own per-survivor resource system or extra items or whatever, just run into people and hit them. You can pick that up from the first game playing as them or playing against them, and that's a level of intuitiveness that not every killer gives you. Night here is a great example. Yes, run away from the guard, but what does that horn blow mean? Why do the windows start glowing when you run past them? What do the different guards do and how can I make them go away? How is the night tracking me when it's sending out a little ghosty orb? None of those questions easily answer themselves. You have to know how the character works somewhat intimately to be able to play against them effectively, and that's the case for a lot of DBD killers who have more involved counterplay. I think this is why behaviour are generally more willing to allow dash killers to be more powerful than many other killer archetypes. Time has shown that killers with more involved counterplay that require more knowledge to play against them effectively will utterly destroy solo queue players if these killers are given too much power. Hag is the perfect example here. Hag's not exactly a great killer, but maintains a relatively high kill rate because the coordination required to not blunder into her traps and die instantly is too much for inexperienced or solo queue players to be able to handle, especially with how uncommon Hag is to play against. Behaviour could buff Hag 9 ways to Sunday without making her overpowered, but that risks utterly destroying solo queue players who find the methods of countering her challenging or obscure. Dash killers rarely have this problem. Just dodge the dash, forehead. The upfront nature of dash killers makes them massive crowd pleasers, and I want to affirm that that is not a problem that needs fixing. People like what they like, and if dash killers are the most popular kinds of killers, then I'm not trying to insist that you all enjoy other things. I'm not the gaming police here demanding that you all go play Hag and Trapper at once, but I do think it's worth examining the archetype and understanding the common flaws that dash killers regularly have, that mean they aren't necessarily going to work out for every player. When I sat down to untangle the thought spaghetti in my brain and started scripting this video, I realised I could break my disdain for dash killers down into 3 core points: zoning, macroplay, and movement. Not every dash killer has every one of these issues, and not every killer with these issues is a dash killer, but most dash killers have at least 2 of these issues. So, yeah, I guess it's time to get yelled at. Okay, so the first issue I have with dash killers is the problem of zoning, and the specific kind of distance denial that dash killers excel at. When a survivor drops a pallet in a tile in an attempt to leave it and move on to the next one, the killer will often break the pallet, which gives the survivor the distance to make it onto the next tile. That's the trade-off. The killer spends time to use up a survivor resource, and the survivor turns that time into distance. But dash killers excel at distance denial. So what will often happen is a survivor leaves the tile, and the killer will use their dash to catch up and get a hit before the survivor can make the next playable resource. This translates into effectively a free hit, and it's a very common and often quite oppressive form of zoning that you can do without even realising you're doing it. Similar to how a mid-range zoner like Pyramid Head uses his power to zone you off of in-tile resources, a Blight or a Chucky will zone you off of resources you intend to reach when you leave a tile. Except when you're being zoned by a mid-range zoner when you're in a tile, you're in a tile. You have a pallet you can stun with, you have LOS breakers to play around, you might have a window that you can vault during the wind down time. There's wiggle room there, ways you can eke out chase interaction and scrape by. But if there's nothing that can protect you from a dash killer, well, you've got nothing, you just die. There's a reason you see brutal strength a lot on killers like Blight, Wesker or Dracula. A faster break means a quicker catch-up time with these dashes and a lower chance for the survivor to make it anywhere useful. I cannot stand this. It doesn't matter how well you've played the tile itself if the dash killer is right back on top of you immediately and gets the hit for free regardless. I see why this would be something that a lot of killer players would like. Holding W is after all a very common complaint that killers have of survivor gameplay, so having a killer archetype that shuts that down would be popular. But this kind of thing just doesn't sit right with me much of the time. I see distance as the reward survivors get for playing well in a tile, a resource you convert into time on generators for your team, and the capacity that most dash killers have to just catch you anywhere regardless of the distance that you've made on them messes with that dynamic. Obviously every killer can walk up to you in dead zone and hit you, survivors can't always chain tiles together profitably, especially in the later game when some pallets are gone, but the problem with distance denial killers is that their definition of a dead zone is much shorter than everybody else's. I did say that these types of killers promote proper chase interactions between them and the survivors by forcing players to commit to tiles, but this has a flip side issue to it. Tiles don't last forever, and dash killers have a tendency to invalidate your skill completely once the tile is used up. Because it doesn't matter how well you play the tile itself if the dash killer gets to hit you for free after the pallet drop anyway. It forces free hits, or in better cases instant pallet drops, as soon as you reach the tile, which feels awful to play against and, at least to me, not interesting to play with either. Of course, if you don't like playing dash killers like this, you can simply choose not to do it. You control the buttons you press after all, but it feels just as bad to leave power value on the table like that. It's just not a gameplay pattern I like being on either side of. To be fair, dash killers are not the only killers who can negate distance that survivors gain on them. ranged killers can do similar things. Deathslinger, Huntress, Trickster, even Pinhead are known for their ability to just kill you if you leave a tile while their ranged power is up. But there's an important distinction between most ranged killers and most dash killers that make the former much more fun to me, at least for the most part. When ranged killers are trying to hit you and transition between tiles, at least they usually have to hit you. When you leave a tile against a ranged killer, they have the opportunity to get some shots in before you make it to the next one, usually just one shot. But some conditions had to be met for that to turn into a health state. Deathslinger has a hard ranged cap and needs enough space to reel you in after hitting you, meaning there are conditions attached to the threat of a down from the gun, and he has to reload after every shot, meaning that if you shot his gun in the tile, he'll have to reload before he tries again. Before he even tries to land the shot, he's got to worry about these things like LOS breakers and reloading, things that you as a survivor can play around, and if he misses that shot, he loses more distance and has to reload again. This interaction feels much fairer. The killer has to jump through some hoops to hit you in transition between tiles, and is only rewarded if he actually lands the shot. Artist and Unknown have similar conditions. They both have to land 2 shots back to back to take a health state from you, and have limited windows after landing the first shots to actually land the second. They have to follow up their first power hit with the second one before the survivor removes weakened or dispels the crow swarm, and that puts the onus on the killer to be able to land their power quickly and consistently. If you're good with the power, you'll deny their distance easily, but if you're bad with it, you'll miss. You'll wait too long between power shots. All you'll be doing is wasting your own time. There's a real risk-reward to these killers that directly correlates with your skill and that of the survivors. In these interactions, dash killers often don't do this, because the way that they deny distance doesn't really depend on hitting you with the power attack. A lot of the time, killers like Blight or Chucky can dash towards you, miss the dash, but still recover and then hit you before you can do anything about it. Hell, Vecna doesn't even have a power attack and he can still do this. Best case scenario here is that you've got a pallet you can work with, but because they're so close to you by this point, the pallet will inevitably have to go down quicker while their power recovers, meaning you'll be forced back into that no-win situation even faster than last time. That's not to say that every dash killer has this problem. Demogorgon and Pig, for example, don't really gain long-term distance from using their dashes, so you're not going to end up in a situation where they can use Shred or Ambush to catch up to you after a break, especially Pig. And Wraith and Spirit are prime examples of non-dash killers who still have the speed to do this, so it is by no means exclusive to dash killers either. It's just a general commonality among the archetype that lowers the skill floor of the killers who can do this. It's why I don't buy the argument of these killers being as powerful as they are because they have a high skill floor. If we're talking about distance denial killers with a high mechanical skill floor and lots of risk built into their rewards, we're not talking about dash killers mostly. We're talking about ranged killers. I understand why killers who do this are so appealing, but it just doesn't work for me. It feels cheap to use and even cheaper to play against. I'm not denying that these characters can have a high skill ceiling. They obviously can. And some dash killers like Billy and Blight have some of the highest skill ceilings in the game. But a lot of the time, players don't get anywhere near close to their skill ceilings because they don't have to. Just zone with the power, spacebar to recover distance, and do well, because the massive time saver that's inherent to the killers with distance denial tools. Egregious zoning through distance denial is the biggest issue I have with playing against dash killers, and most of them can do this consistently. But as I said earlier, I don't exactly hate playing against most killers that much. Long distance zoning isn't my favourite thing in the world to go against, but it's not like I'm throwing my monitor out the window whenever I get a Wesker or a Demogorgon. Nah, the real issue comes with my second problem with dash killers, but it's a problem that only applies to a couple of them. Let's talk about control dashes and the Macroplay Problem. Anyone who knows me or the history of killers that I like knows that I love macro-dependent killers. I like killers who make your brain sweat. I like setting up traps and monitoring lock-on stacks with Skull Merchant, or managing health states across the map with Twins, or tracking down the Lament configuration with Pinhead by piecing together survivor locations to deduce its spawn point. I love feeling like a real smarty pants when I play DBD. So any killer who engages explicitly with the 1v4 elements of the game and can directly benefit from my map knowledge, game sense and planning skills is going to be one I will appreciate. In theory, control dashes might add depth to characters, because if you have good game sense and track survivor locations well, you can get a lot of value by cropping up exactly where survivors don't want you to be. But in practice, this isn't often the case, because unfortunately, these fuckers exist, and they showcase perfectly why control dashes and map coverage in general can make Macroplay as a killer much less interesting and complex. Let's compare Blight, one of the classic control dash killers, to Dredge, who also has much of his power budget balanced around traversing the map quickly. Dredge's power is on a 10-second cooldown, which is the same time as it takes Blight to regenerate all 5 of his tokens, and Dredge's power on paper is a bit better at actually getting from point A to point B. He travels over twice as quickly as Blight does, and teleports through walls and terrain, and in Nightfall that teleport time and cooldown becomes much quicker. But Blight has a lot of extra benefits and conditions that let his map coverage be much better, and importantly much freer than Dredge's sometimes. Dredge can only teleport 2 lockers, can't teleport to a locker that's too close to a hooked survivor. Survivors can choose to lock lockers to make it longer to break out of a locker, and gives an early warning when the killer does so. The power goes on its full cooldown regardless of how many teleport tokens you've used, or if you don't use any and teleport to Remnant instead. You don't have it available from the start of the game, and the simple slight quirk that Blight also has one of the best chase powers in the entire game. Dredge's map coverage is probably about as good as Blight's overall. It's better with good locker spawns and worse with bad ones. But Dredge has far more points of interaction and restrictions that allow survivors to actually play around that mobility. To not get caught out by a Dredge, survivors can keep an eye on the nearest lockers to their gens. They can lock lockers in areas where they're resetting or doing a critical generator that don't get interrupted as easily, and listen out for Dredge smashing their way against the doors. And Dredge can't immediately teleport back to Hook to contest a save, so a healthy survivor is guaranteed to get the unhook off without a trade, even if the Dredge beelines it back to Hook as soon as they can. Blight has none of these restrictions. He can come back to Hook as close as he likes, whenever he likes, to contest unhooks from across the map. If he doesn't need all of his tokens to get where he needs to go, his power will be back quicker, and survivors anywhere on the map always have to be careful because at any time, with little warning and little cooldown, he could drop any chase he's in and immediately head to your generator regardless of the situation. This has several very frustrating consequences on gameplay. It makes Blight a very effective tunneler since he can always pressure any unhook. It means he can patrol a 3-gen incredibly quickly and over a wider distance than most killers. But most critically to me, it makes the decision making and macro play an absolute piss take, especially with long range information perks like Barbecue and Chili and Tinkerer. Where your gens are, the chases you take, these decisions don't actually matter. You can instantly dash across the map to wherever it is you need to be. Your decisions don't matter, because if you get it wrong, you could easily course correct, and the time saved by doing all of this means that you have time to have longer chases than anybody else. Which is kind of a problem when you've also got one of the best chase powers in the game. Billy does this even worse, because at least Blight has a cooldown after using his power. Billy can literally just run wherever he wants at twice the speed of sound with no cooldown and gets rewarded for spamming the absolute shit out of his power. If Blight's map traversal is cheap, Billy's isn't just free, he gets active benefits from doing it. It's utterly absurd. The lack of consequences to your macro play decisions when playing Billy or Blight takes a nice fat steaming shit all over my favourite part of DBD, something that's fairly unique to them. Dredge, Sadako, Unknown and Xenomorph all have map coverage tools that can take them across long distances like Blight and Billy, but they have conditions or restrictions or counterplay that the fucking shifty twins over here just don't have to worry about. And at this point, I'm not sure if it's an issue of whether I like them anymore. Billy and Blight are 2 of the strongest killers in Dead by Daylight. Even regardless of my personal opinions on them, the killers might just be overpowered because the Strength of Infinite free map control isn't appropriately built into their power budget. They have some of the best map ability in the game that's got no meaningful restrictions or counterplay, and that's not really acceptable when you've also got really good chase powers and great zoning and good add-ons. These killers are just overloaded to hell, and you can't really nerf that out of them without making them feel absolutely rancid to play. Overheat was intended to do that, and it completely killed Hillbilly until they eventually got rid of it. Behaviourists kind of designed themselves into a corner with Billy and Blight. Their combination of control dashes and chase dashes with no restrictions and minimal downtime has led to two S-tier killers who can kind of be played without thinking, and have also become way too popular and well liked to be meaningfully changed without causing community-wide uproar. These killers have tons of mechanical depth, which is great, and definitely makes them rewarding for dedicated enthusiasts, but that's the only depth they have. Outside of chase, they kind of play themselves, especially with information perks like lethal and barbecue. I don't like playing them, I don't like playing against them, they're some of the strongest killers in DBD, and they're in every fucking game, so I can't even get away from the bastards. Ugh, it's just disappointing. Right, okay, this video's getting a bit negative. I'm sure you've heard enough whining by now. So let's lighten up and let me talk to you about the dash killers that I do like, because there's so bloody many of them that some of them had to click with me. If Billy and Blight represent the two worst implementations of dashes as map control, then Vecna and Oni are the killers who did control dashes right, because while their map coverage tools are powerful, the decisions they make with them actually matter, and punish your misplays as much as they reward your good plays. Vecna's fly cooldown is pretty powerful, and it can be used to get you somewhere you desperately need to be that little bit faster, but its range is limited and its cooldown is hefty, balanced out by the fact that he has 3 other spells, so you don't feel Fly's downtime quite as much. Meanwhile, Oni adds extra depth to the high mobility end of dash killers, because while his map control in Blood Fury is extremely powerful, his access to it and how he chooses to use it or conserve it gives him some really interesting depth even outside of chasers. Oni's power is an extremely limited resource, and managing that resource is what makes the killer fun to me. Knowing when to commit to a chase with an injured survivor versus when to drop them and let them bleed, knowing when to burn power for map coverage and being punished by losing a chunk of power if you go the wrong way, understanding when you've got enough fuel in the tank to greed for a slugging spree, and when to just take the pickup and conserve your blood. I love figuring out where people are likely to have reset so that I can cash in the blood orbs later when I need it. I enjoy the way that Oni changes my thought process in a game, the way he rewards you massively for making the right play, but can punish you so cripplingly for making the wrong one. And here's something I bet nobody expected, but a dash killer that I will go to bat for, at least in terms of going against them, is Wesker. Yeah, I know, me having something positive to say about Wesker will catch some people by surprise, but he doesn't fall into a lot of the pitfalls that most dash killers tend to fall into. Between his significant cooldowns, large terror radius and limited range on his dashes, he can't really use his dashes for map control very well. Instead, his 1v4 strength comes from his passive slowdown via Ouroboros infection when he uses his power, and I much prefer that interaction. With Wesker's sprays, you can economise your time as survivor by opening your supply chests earlier than you need to, while you still have time before the chase starts, so you don't need to go looking for one when you're injured and your infection gets worse. You can leave cans somewhere that you're going to reset later in case you need it, or bring one with you to use it on someone when you're going to unhook them. It adds extra depth to playing against Wesker, but it's only relevant if he's good with his power. A competent Wesker who can pressure your time makes survivor experience against him more interesting. And his distance-based zoning isn't anywhere near as bad as some of these other killers like Dracula or Chucky, because not only does he have a longer wind-up time than they do, he also has an extra step to secure the health state. Wesker has to throw or slam the survivor that he hits with his dash into something to get full value out of it, which means he has an additional aim component. In a dead zone where any other dash killer would get a free hit, no questions asked, Wesker has to adjust his dash direction and hit a survivor at an angle to get the hit. In these regards, he's more like a ranged killer. He doesn't lose distance from a miss per se, but if he throws a survivor without taking a health state, he has given back to them some of the distance that he gained from his power. It's honestly a pretty elegant system. I definitely had my issues with Wesker and still do. I don't really like how his infection system encouraged him to tunnel before it got nerfed, and during the months where nobody played anything else, I got sick of the sight of the guy before long, but my issue with Wesker has never really been his dashes. Truthfully, it's never really even been his power. I just don't like Wesker as a character. I hate the game he's from. I don't like his stupid Matrix-ass, cosplay-ass outfit, and while the VA Connor Fogarty does a great job imitating DC Douglas, I just don't like the voice lines that are copy and pasted from various RE5 cutscenes. Wesker is the only character in DBD, at least for me, for whom being a licensed character is a downside. If his power was on a DBD original killer, I would be much happier with his existence in the fog. I don't like being reminded that RE5 exists. I just don't. It sucks. It's cringe. And if you want to learn more about why I dislike that game so much and Wesker's role in it, I go into it in more detail in the video I made when Wesker first came out. So yeah, go watch that one. Killers like Oni, Wesker and even Vecna show that while behaviour tend to fall into the same issues over and over again with their dash killer designs, many of these issues are not inherent to the archetype. But even in the case of these successful killer designs, I just haven't been able to click with many of them. They haven't had the same purchase on my brain that my special little meow meows have had. They haven't stuck in my head in the same way that Twins or Plague or especially Skull Merchant did. Well, one might have done, but we'll talk about her later. You want to know the biggest reason that dash killers don't really butter my crumpets? It's because, in my humble opinion, DBD's movement is mostly, not very good. Dead by Daylight is a game full of oddities. Every time you play a match, every map and every power is caked in layers and layers of spaghetti code and fuckwards collisions and a map from 8 years ago that's been reworked with tiles from 3 years ago on a killer who released 6 months ago. This game is just not built around fluid and consistent movement. I don't mind learning janky collisions, I really don't, but I cannot stand the feeling of fighting against the map collision and geometry more than using it to my advantage. That's something that I really enjoy about Skull Merchant. I love finding a new spot to stash a drone, some sneaky elevation to extend the drone's reach, a skinny little angle or tiny crack in the wall where I can sneak a scan, sneak a hit, sneak a hinder. It feels brilliant. It feels so much better to me than chewing on a wall trying to hug tech it with Wesker, only to find that a random bit of metal on the floor has completely blue-balled my power. But it's more than that. More than just finicky implementation that puts me off of DBD's movement characters. My biggest problem with dash killers is to do with the formula of the game itself. If I wanted to play a character whose mechanical skill expression truly enhanced the gameplay through movement, added to the risk-reward in ways I couldn't find anywhere else, why the hell would I go looking for that in Dead by Daylight? So many games have movement characters and mechanics. So many of them. And in a well-designed symmetrical game, movement gets used as a playmaking tool. A way to get the upper hand on a stronger or more durable opponent by outmaneuvering them and taking fights they can't easily prepare for. The question isn't just, can I use my dash or my speed boost or whatever correctly, but is the situation right for me to use it and still survive? Am I going to come out on top if I make the choice now rather than later, or am I just wasting my own time? An example of a game that nails this dynamic is Titanfall 2. A game widely acclaimed for having one of the best movement systems ever in a multiplayer game. In Titanfall 2, your goal in multiplayer is obviously to acquire and stay in your Titan as often as you can. It's a giant walker with more firepower than an orgy and NRA conference, but this doesn't mean that you as a pilot lack agency in pilot versus Titan fights. Next to the big lumbering Titans, pilots are lightning fast and incredibly agile. Their movement gives them the choice to pick fights with Titans on the pilot's terms, and turn the giant advantage that a Titan provides into a hindrance that can be exploited. You've got blinks and wall rides and jump jets and stim packs to run rings around them. You've got fire stars to blind them. You can rodeo to steal a battery or dance around over their heads, shelling them with magnetic grenades. It's a David and Goliath system that means you'll never feel entirely safe inside your Titan, and gives a skilled pilot a means to level the playing field. It's incredible fun, and wouldn't be possible without the game's high-speed aerial movement system. But this dynamic isn't just limited to games with giant robots that got ultimately cannibalized by Apex Legends. A great example is melee assassins and skirmishers in League of Legends like Qiyana. I wasted years of my life on that game, and over time I found myself getting really into Qiyana because her particular take on close quarters movement was so much fun. For those who don't know anything about League of Legends, and for you people watching I do truly envy you, Qiyana's W is a dash that enchants her blade with a bonus effect based on the terrain that she dashes to. Meaning you're encouraged to dash different areas of terrain to combine rock, river and grass for maximum damage. I love the way this impacts Qiyana's fighting style. because it forces you to consider where you're dashing, even regardless of the enemy's abilities. Other assassins might burn their dashes to dodge enemy abilities or close the gap, but Kiana needs to do this while also juggling the elements by picking them up in specific places. And she's rewarded for doing this by having high damage and a toolbox of utility in her stealth and crowd control, most of which is obviously dependent on getting the right elements at the right time. How and when you use Kiana's movement is a vital skill to learn, because they'll know that you're going for certain elements when you need them, and can capitalise on you burning cooldowns to get them. You need to be careful which terrain you dash to if you're using your dashes to all in, because if you double up on the same element, you'll be missing out on burst damage. Her dashes give her more depth, but also demand more awareness of your own positioning to take full advantage of them. It's another case of that risk-reward that the enemy can punish if you do it wrong. Dead by Daylight, however, is an asymmetrical game. That risk-reward can't really exist in the same way. The only punishment that you get for burning dashes when you shouldn't, or making errors in mechanical execution, is that you'll put the ability on cooldown. And if that cooldown recovers quickly, then what's the damn point? I don't even think this is something that can or should be changed. The asymmetrical nature of the game means that the risk-reward dynamic inherent to mobility in most games can't really exist here, and that's okay. If the way that dash killers have to work in this game runs counter to what I enjoy about mobility in games, then that isn't a Dead by Daylight problem. It's not behaviour's job to accommodate me, and if I want that, well, I can just play something else. I can play a game where the maps are designed in ways that support mobile play, and the counterplay doesn't come from clunky collisions or hefty cooldowns, but from checks and balances that the opponents can use against you. I'm talking, of course, about Marvel Rivals. Oh no, I'm sorry, I can't keep a straight face here. Marvel Rivals movement sucks ass, I don't know what to tell you. There's only 2 or 3 characters with interesting mobility in the whole cast. They're all duelists, so if you like actually, having tanks or supports on your team at all, you're ready and you get to play them. And you can't really play around with the terrain very much when the Punisher is destroying it every 10 seconds. Nah, the game I'm actually talking about is the ex-girlfriend that you left to go play Marvel Rivals, but you've never deleted from your phone contacts, just in case they come crawling back. And that's Overwatch. In my years playing online games, there's been no game that nails the balance between mechanical skill expression and strategy in movement quite like Overwatch. It's got so many different kinds of movement and every role has access to it. You've got supports like Lucio or Kiriko who provide constant value in the thick of fighting, while still being evasive and slippery. You've got DPS like Tracer or Genji who can take off angles and capitalise on bad defensive positions to break a stall or cripple a backline. And dive tanks like Doomfist or Winston who draw the team's aggro by being unignorable threats and allowing their team to follow up on their engagers. But there's one who stands neck and shoulders above the rest. The king of strategic mobility that you could only really have in a game like Overwatch. It's the joyous rat, Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball is one of Overwatch's most unique heroes. He's a highly disruptive and aggressive dive tank who swings around the map on a grapple and crashes into players at breakneck speeds. Literally. His job is to get in, cause as much mayhem as possible to make room for his team, and then get out again without dying before grabbing a health pack or checking in with his supports and re-engaging to do it all again. He's kind of the definitive dive tank in a way. His overall damage is quite low for a tank, but a full combo of his abilities will put a lot of his squishy targets in the emergency ward, and in need of a bailout from their team, since there's no way a Juno or Ashe or something is going to chew through 800 plus HP of Hamster in the time it takes for the ball to finish them off. A properly executed ball dive demands instant attention from the entire team, and it's up to you to maximise the attention that you can pull to give your team room to follow up without drawing so much attention that you die. That's the classic ball problem that makes a character hard to play, and gives solo queue ball players such a bad reputation. If you don't think things through and just take fights because you feel like it, Ball is the feedingest character in Overwatch. You throw yourself into the enemy team at twice the speed of sound, but you don't have any crowd control mitigation or barriers to protect yourself. Just a big block of health and some shields. And if they burn through that before you can get value, you are single-handedly throwing the game. That is a dynamic that justifies Ball's design. His mobility gives him an insane amount of agency and playmaking potential, but if you don't use that properly and the enemy capitalizes on it, you are literally a detriment to your team. Ball's strength is decided not just by mechanical skill, but by creativity. Making opportunities for yourself that no other hero can, and having the mechanical skill to pull it off. You can use your momentum to knock players out from behind cover or high ground so that your teammates can collapse on them. You can take shortcuts and rollouts for audacious backcaps, or strike from angles that nobody will ever expect. You can use your knockback to fire enemies into your minefield, dangerous allied ultimates, or even off the map. You can turn the enemies into snooker balls, for Christ's sakes. If you're willing to embrace the bullshit, Wrecking Ball is some of the most fun you can have in Overwatch. And you can only have fun in the way that Ball allows you to in a game like Overwatch, that has the crowd control and coordination potential to make him high risk as well as high reward. So this brings me back to Dead by Daylight. If I wanted to spend my evening playing a character with skill expressive movement that tests my abilities both mechanically and strategically, and gives a high reward alongside a high risk in creative and high speed play, why would I ever want this when I can do this?
It's over.
Yeah.
Honestly, deserved. I don't even care.
Dead by Daylight is a 1v4 asymmetrical horror game at its bare bones. It's not a team shooter or a MOBA, and I don't want to play it like one. What makes Dead by Daylight unique to me is the 1v4 elements. I love the depth that DBD's 1v4 adds to both sides, and there's nowhere else I can get gameplay like it. Why do you think I dick ride trap killers so much? They play the 1v4 game very directly. They leverage knowledge of survivor movement to set up effective traps, and disarming those traps is all about good positioning and time management. You don't think about these things in the same way in any other game, and that's what makes DBD compelling to me. Planning and thinking in ways that no other game allows you to do. This puts Dead by Daylight's current love affair with dash killers into a difficult position for me, because these killers clearly have an audience, so it would be selfish for me to demand behaviour changes course just to please me and give me more garbage that I like. I'm just not really part of that audience, and it kills my enthusiasm a little bit for future releases. Rumour has it that the next killer coming in March will be yet another dash killer, and that kind of bums me out, because I'm not terribly hopeful that I'll enjoy them. But you know, maybe there is something to look forward to, because DBD's just made their most interesting dash killer to date, and you can tell, because I avoided talking about her for most of this video. It's the Houndmaster. Houndmaster overcomes a lot of the issues I've had with dash killer design over the years, mostly because she doesn't dash directly but sends her dog to do it for her. This means that she doesn't do what the other dash killers do, where they miss their attack but still get to hit you, because they exit their miss cooldown half an inch away from you. If Snug misses, she will always lose distance and waste her own time, wasting much more if she pauses to redirect the dog and still misses the attack. Her zoning is still very good, but she at least has to hit the attack to do so, putting her more in the camp of ranged killers like Deathslinger. Snug's movement feels great. Every time you use him, you're shown how your collision is going to work, and you're given the information responsiveness to allow you to weaponize your collision. You slide off everything. And while she does have map coverage in the vein of the control dash killers, it's far less oppressive and more conditional than theirs, mostly because she has to commit to the direction she's going in once she locks into search mode. 150% is a lot slower than the 230% speed or higher of Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. She can only target gens if she wants to travel long distances, and if she wants to deviate from her path away from the targeted zone, she has to wait for Snug to complete his patrol and then come back to her, limiting access to her power if she doesn't get fully committed to Snug's path. I appreciate that Houndmaster gets the value that dash killers get through mechanics adjacent to dash killers without the stuff that makes them insufferable. She's the most unique dash killer in Dead by Daylight, and it makes me optimistic about the archetype's future. Yes, her vault time is faster than it should be because of a bug, and her cooldown is too short, but in principle, when they actually get round to balancing bug fixing her properly, she's just more interesting than the other dash killers. Regardless of whether or not the new killer in March will have a dash, Dead by Daylight's future will definitely involve many more dash killers to come. They're extremely popular to play, usually considered fun to go against, and in general they're very safe designs that it's hard to catastrophically fuck up. Although after launch Chucky, you can't say behaviour didn't try. Maybe one of these days I'll get the Wrecking Ball Dead by Daylight, with movement that I can really sink my teeth into. I really hope I do, but to be honest I'm not optimistic. I just don't really play this game to play these sorts of characters for the most part, and if the next year, 18 months or so is like the last year to 18 months we've just had, I'm not looking forward to the inevitable onslaught of dash killers punctuated by the occasional cryptid. They're clearly crowd pleasers, and I can't fault behaviour for making them, but dear god, just make something else once in a while, man. Well, let's look on the bright side. Maybe the Skullmetric rework will be good. And even if they do make another Blight or another Billy, you know, it could be worse. They could be Legion.